Saturday morning. I'm happy the snow did not come yesterday. I am Michelle Feynman. I am the director of the Combined Election and Registration Board. Next to me is Leanne Angerman. She is the assistant director. I'm going to give you a couple of names that you guys will probably be dealing with quite a bit. Lori O'Day, of course, is the queen of campaign finance, and she will be hosting this session today. And she will be one of the people that you probably talk to quite a bit. Our counterpart is Juanita Trevinovic, and she is not here today, but that is another name to kind of keep in mind. We also have the two election administrators. Jerry Schmidt is brand new as the election administrator, and Jenny Gasparovic, assistant election administrator. We also have Joel around here.
Right here.
Voter registration administrator. And then up here is a lot of our staff. And I'm not going to go through each of their names, but just kind of get an eye of them. So afterwards, if you have questions, they're here to learn just like you, because we want to make sure our office is always accessible and friendly for you guys when you come in, and that you're getting the information you're needing. So we are cross-training up here, as you can see. And these individuals will be able to assist you when you come in if you need some help. Now, if you need the very in-depth help, you go to Lori and Juanita. But again, thank you all for coming. If you have, since we're going to be videotaping this, try to hold a lot of your questions till the end, because there's going to be a lot of different sections that we're going to go over, and there's a good possibility that we may hit on it. Keep in mind, we'll stay here as long as you want afterwards to answer any questions. If you have samples, any of that kind of stuff, we're more than happy to help you get started on the right foot. But we just kind of want to go through this whole thing and see how that goes. Again, like she said, it will be videotaped, so we'll be there in the event you have questions, or someone you go back and say, man, that class was really good. You should have been there. Are you going to do another one? No. You should have been here when we had the first time. So that will be there on video for you guys probably next week. And did you want to say anything?
I think you covered it. Thank you for coming.
Back to you.
Okay, well, thanks for being here today. If you're not able to see the screen, the good news is the handouts are just about the exact screen. If we have those, if you did not get a handout and you need one, I think they're making more copies right now.
Just want to give. I'll get more, right? Okay, go ahead.
Did you get a handout? Anybody back here not get one? Okay, that says the campaign finance.
No, you went over here, please.
I didn't grab mine. I'm sorry. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here on a Saturday morning. What's more fun than learning about campaign finance on Saturday morning? So I'm glad to see so many faces here, because this is a chance for you to learn and a chance for you to help us help you. Right? So how many folks here are candidates? If I could see a hand. Excellent. And if you're serving as your own treasurer, keep your hand up. Okay, so we have a lot of that. Yep. All right, what about treasurers for party committees? We have those too. Okay, good. And any treasurers for PACs in the house? Okay, nice. All right, well, our goal here is just to help you feel more confident about filling out this paperwork to get it correct the first time. So we're just happy that you're here to learn. The forms that you need to complete for campaign finance are always available in our office, but they're also available at the Secretary of State's website. So that website is in.gov/SOS for Secretary of State. So that's in.gov/SOS. Like I said, we always have them in our office as well. So, I forgot I have to have my fancy clicker. Let me just say, here's a disclaimer here. This presentation is intended as a general interpretive resource only, and where your legal rights are concerned, you should consult your attorney to be fully and properly advised. Okay, we're going to start with some acronyms and terms. Sometimes we throw around three-letter abbreviations. People don't know what they mean. So CEB is the County Election Board. That's our board that is a bipartisan board made up of 5 people that are nominated by the chairman, and also our court clerk for Lake County. So that's CEB. CFA stands for Campaign Finance Act. And then we have some form titles. So CFA 1 is a statement of organization for candidates. CFA 2, statement of organization for political action committees, which are different than regular party committees. CFA 3 is the statement of organization for regular party committees. CFA 4 is the big packet, the reports that you turn in. And CFA 11 is the supplemental contribution report, sometimes known as the 48-hour report. And almost no one needs to use those. They're very specific for specific candidates at specific times when they get a specific amount of money donated. So we'll talk a little bit more about those coming up. So, definition of a candidate for campaign finance purposes. So, for the purposes of the CFA, a person becomes a candidate for state or local office when they meet the threshold for opening a candidate's committee. However, opening a committee does not mean you're going to appear on the ballot. We did have a couple of folks fill in the CFA 1, turn it in, open their committee, and think, hey, I'm on the ballot. No, they didn't fill out their candidacy paperwork yet, so they were not on the ballot yet. They did get it completed, so we're glad for that. Or if the person submits candidate filing paperwork for offices paying more than $5,000 a year, they are considered a candidate for CFA purposes. So we have, next, there's a 2-salary tier to determine when a CFA 1 statement of organization is filed. So if your office pays less than $5,000 a year, that's most school board offices or some of the very small towns, then the candidate is required to open a committee when he or she raises or spends $500 towards the running for office, including their personal funds. We get a lot of people say, I'm not going to raise any money, I'm just going to use my own money. All the thresholds include your own personal funds. So even if you're not having fundraisers or any of that, the CFA thresholds apply to your own personal funds as well. Or, so the second tier is if your office pays more than $5,000 per calendar year, which is most offices that are represented here, then the candidate's required to open a committee when he or she raises or spends $100 towards running for office. Or if they file candidate paperwork, that's when their CFA 1 is due 10 days after they file to be a candidate, or 7 days after the candidacy window closes, whichever is first. Okay, so deadlines to file the CFA 1 for a candidate committee. We just had this, this pass. So, like I just said, CFA 1 must be filed not later than noon, 10 days after raising or spending the threshold amount, either the 100 or 500. And it applies universally whether or not an election is being held for that office. So if you're going to run for something next year, but this year you've already done $100 to raise or spend towards something you might be running for next year, even if your name is not on the ballot this year, that meets the threshold. You have to open your account, and it's just forward-looking for the next election. Or the CFA 1 must be filed not later than noon, 10 days after a person files the paperwork to run for an office on the ballot in that election year, or 7 days after the candidate filing period ends. So what does it mean to raise or spend? So we're going to start with contributions. There's 3 types of contributions. There's direct, there's in-kind, and there's loans. Lots of times people get confused with what those mean. So a direct contribution is when you receive money, either cash or check. We've had a lot of cash app type things where people are now doing Squarespace. They get the little thing to plug in the phone and they can swipe people's cards at fundraisers. So those would be direct contributions. That goes right into the bank account of the campaign. There's an in-kind contribution. And what that is, it's more about goods and services. Someone donates the use of a hall. Someone donates your signs. Someone donates a billboard. It's a good or services. That's not a direct, that's in-kind. When you do have in-kind contributions, it's very important to have receipts or a document with a fair market value of what has been donated in kind. So if you're using a facility, that facility usually rents for $500 a night. That's an in-kind donation of $500. You're not seeing that money coming into your account, but that's the value that someone has donated towards your campaign. And it must also be reported as an expenditure. And we'll talk about the ins and outs of in-kind contributions in a little bit. And there's loans. So when you put your own money in, especially to start up a campaign, you've got a couple of choices. You can make it a contribution to the campaign, or you can loan the money to the campaign. If you ever expect to be repaid, to get that money back, then you need to have it as a loan. Because if you make a direct contribution to your campaign, that money is in your campaign fund, and it's not like, oh, I'll just take that back out and no. It has to be a loan. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that as well. And if you have questions, if I'm going too quickly, we'll definitely have some questions at the end. So let's talk about expenditures. So this is money that comes out of your checkbook. It's campaign pays directly for a purchase or an expense. It's at Office Max for my flyers. It's at a store for food for my fundraiser. So that's a direct expenditure. Then also in-kind expenditures, goods or services donated to the committee. So we did have a candidate ask us about using their own personal money. Let's say they're at a fundraiser, the tickets are $100. They take cash out of their own wallet and pay for the ticket to the fundraiser, but then they want to be reimbursed by their campaign. Totally fine to do that. But whenever a candidate makes an expense that needs to be reimbursed by the committee, it has to be shown as an in-kind expenditure. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. All of these things count towards the over $100 or $500 threshold amount that would require a committee to be organized, even if the candidate is using their own money. So let's go to CFA Choose. I didn't see anyone here that's working with a PAC, Political Action Committee, but that is when an organized group raises or spends over $100 towards influencing the outcome of an election, including a public question. We've got several communities that are doing public questions this year, referendums for schools. So if a group is seeking to influence that, then they would do the CFA 2. And they must file a CFA 2 statement of organization not later than noon, 10 days after raising or spending the $100 threshold. CFA 3s are the statement of organization for party committees. So let's say it's the Munster Republicans or the Hammond Dems, or it's those party committees, and they have a different threshold. It's when something is over $200. So if you're a treasurer for a party committee, the threshold for you is $200. Anything under 200 can be unitemized on your report. Everything over 200 must be itemized. And we'll talk about where those itemizations go in just a second. Updating statements of organization. We did send out a mailer recently, if you are someone that has a committee that's been open for quite some time. We asked for new statements of organization because sometimes the treasurer changes or they drop their landline and now we have no phone number to contact the folks. So anytime that your information changes, we really ask that you do a new statement of organization. A change in the committee chair or treasurer, the address or contact information is changed. If you change the type for a candidates committee, let's say you opened an exploratory committee. You're interested in running for office, you didn't know what office you were thinking of running for, but then once you did your research, you decided on a specific office, then your committee changes from exploratory to a candidates principal committee, and we need a new statement of organization to know who your officers are for that. Or any updates to information requested on the form. Why do we need it? Because we have to be able to get in contact with you. We want to be able to send you notices if there's a problem with your reports, or just knowing how to get in touch with the people that are completing the reports is very helpful for us. We do actually really like emails so that we can send out email reminders when reports are coming up. Or like today, some of you may have gotten an email reminding you of the training today. So that's why we need the contact information. Public records. So everything that you file with our office, it's all about, campaign finance is all about transparency. They just need to know where the money's coming from, where the money's going. But every document in our office is subject to a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Public Records request. So all of your reports, all of your statements of organization, that's all public record, and any voter can come in and fill out a form and see exactly your campaign finance information, who's donating to your party, committees, all that. And even the requests for information are public information. So if you wanted to know, hey, who's looking at my stuff, you could come in and find out if anyone's filled out a public request to look at your information. So everything is public request. A public request is all public information. And believe me, everybody's looking. Okay, commingling of funds and employee identification numbers. So the statute states that all funds of a committee must be segregated from and not commingled with any personal funds of any officers, members, or associates of the committee. In other words, most candidate committees will need to open up a separate bank account. You probably have done that already if you're here today, just to keep it separate from your own personal finances. Banks may require you to obtain an employee identification number from the IRS. And if you haven't done that yet or you need help with that, we do have an information packet available for how to complete that process, but that's not what we do. So you'll have to check with your bank and the IRS in order to get the EIN number set up. All right, here comes the fun part. CFA 4 reports and reporting periods. So all open committees are required to file CFA 4 reports of contributions and expenditures according to the state's required schedule. How do you know if your committee is open? If you filled out a CFA 1, your committee is open. If you did not fill out a CFA 1 but were required to, we opened one for you and sent you a notice, and your committee is now open. So your first CFA 4 report, which you got a copy of when you came in, you might want to look at that while we're going through the report. Your first report would be the pre-primary report for anyone's on the ballot this year or any party committees or PACs. Your first report would be the pre-primary report, and that period ends 25 days before the primary election, and it's due in our office 18 days before the primary. So there's a yellow piece of paper you picked up when you came in. That's the reporting schedule, and it'll show the reporting dates. So I believe it's from January 1st to April 7th. And then they give you 7 days to complete your report. So that, all your income, all your expenses, the money that came in and out from January 1st to April 7th would go on that report. And if you want to look at the cover sheet, it looks like this. So you'll see right in the middle where it says type of report, you fill in, of course, you fill in your name and address and contact information. Right in the middle where it says type of report, you'll see in section 11 it says check 1, pre-primary, pre-election, annual, and number 12 is reporting period. So in that section would go those dates, January 1st through April 7th. And we only want activity between those dates on the pre-primary report. Then the other reports that are due are the pre-election report, 25 days before the general, and an annual report due by the third Wednesday in January for PACs and candidate committees, and by March 1st for the party committees. So reports can be submitted to our office by mail, you can walk them in, you can fax them in, you can email them in, but we do ask if you're submitting them electronically, please keep them 10 pages or less. We don't want a bunch of blank pages, so please no blank pages. And the deadline for submitting those reports, when we say they're due April 14, we mean by noon. Not 12:01, by noon. And there are penalties for submitting them late. So you'll want to keep that in mind when submitting your reports. So when, in the year that you're on the ballot, I'm assuming many of you are on the ballot this year, you have to complete 3 reports. Pre-primary, and if you make it through the primary, you do the pre-election, and whether or not you make it through the primary, you do the annual. So as long as your committee is open, you are required to file. A lot of folks put all their energy and effort into running in the primary. They don't make it through the primary, and they think, my work here is done. It's not done, so we're going to need another report for you, or you can close your committee, and we can talk about that in a little bit. So in every other year, when you're not on the ballot, only the annual report is due for candidates. PACs and regular committees do all 3 reports every year. But if you're a candidate, you always owe the annual. So you may or may not want to put a little note in your phone for the second week of January that repeats annually. Hey, is my CFA report done? It's a good reminder because you don't want to forget about it and get behind. So the CFA 4 summary sheet, that's the first page of that packet. It must be submitted even if there's no activity by the committee. So if you didn't raise any money, you didn't spend any money, you didn't do anything, we still need a report. And it would have all zeros on it. Zeros listed for contributions, expenditures, and the balance cash on hand. So when you look at the report, you'll see in line 13 where it says cash on hand and investments at the beginning of this reporting period. If this is your first report, that number is always going to be 0. Because you got to start someplace, and that someplace is 0. And then everything that comes in will be listed under contributions, either itemized or unitemized. That's in that section there. And then below that is expenditures. Everything that goes out goes in that section. It's either itemized if it's over 100 or unitemized if it's less. So it's kind of basic arithmetic. You start with 0, you add whatever you put in, you subtract whatever you took out, and then you have a balance at the bottom. And the balance always goes in that total on line 18, cash on hand. So it's like the checkbooks that we all used to balance before we got the apps for our debit cards. So you always take your balance, add the deposits, subtract the expenditures, and you have a balance at the bottom. And when you do your next report, the ending balance of this report would be the beginning balance of your next report. So it's like flipping the page on your checkbook. You may or may not have ever made a mistake in your checkbook, turning the page, and if you had $125 in there and you flip the page to start a new check register and you accidentally put 521 instead of 125, there's going to be a big problem, right? So it's important to make sure that when you're going from report to report, the ending balance of your previous report, the beginning balance of your current report. Okay, so the items that it must include.
Are we holding off till the end? Or
Yes, if you can hold off your questions to the end, that'd be great. Make a little note, yeah. So what must it include? The committee information, the type of report. You must have the correct reporting dates. You must have the summary of contributions and expenditures, both itemized and unitemized, must be signed. So what happens is you would put your contributions on the summary page, and there are schedules behind it. That's why the packet's so thick. So you'll see Schedule A is for stuff that's coming in. Schedule B is for stuff that's going out. And we'll go into those a little bit more details. Please don't send blank pages, like we said. We scan everyone's reports. We have an electronic file of it, and we have lots of scans of blank pages. And it just takes up space, and we don't need those. And when in doubt, on the back of each of these pages are very detailed instructions. So before you feel overwhelmed or before you think you can't complete it, look at the back. It's got it line by line. It'll tell you precisely what you need to fill in there and what the parameters are. So when in doubt, flip it over, read the back. All right, so we're going to move on to Schedule A, contributions. So itemized contributions from different sources go on different pages of the Schedule A. You'll see like page 2 on this packet is Schedule A1. That's for anything that comes from an individual. And we must have the contributor's name and address. If the person gave over $1,000, we need their occupation. There's a little line for occupation. And we can't have business person. We need to have their actual occupation. It's just one of the ways we keep track of how businesses, how people are influencing an election. And $1,000 is the threshold that we need someone's occupation. So what you do then is you would list the total of all the itemized Schedule A contributions on your summary sheet. So you'll see there's a page for individuals, there's a page for corporations, because there are limits on what corporations can give, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There are pages for other political action committees. Those are actual PACs, not someone else's campaign candidate committee. That's not a PAC. So everything else goes on other, which I believe is maybe A5. So you'll see that different contributions go on different pages, and it's important to put them correctly. There's a page for labor unions. If you get one from a labor organization, you need to have that and read the back for the instructions. And all other organizations is Schedule A5. So if there's a business that contributes to you, but they're an LLC, that's different than a corporation. They have different parameters from what they can give. So that would be on other organizations. All other candidate committees would also be other organizations. So keep that in mind. And we're only going to write on those papers anything that's over $100. So $100.01. If it's $100, that's still not over 100, so it does not have to be itemized. But keep in mind that it's cumulative throughout the year. So let's say you have a fundraiser and the tickets are $50. You do not have to write every single person who bought a ticket for your $50 fundraiser. Those would all be unitemized and go in the summary sheet under unitemized contributions because they're less than 100. But keep in mind, you're going to have to keep really accurate records, because if that person gives you $50 in February and then gives you $200 in July, now they both have to be itemized because they've met the $100 threshold to be itemized. So the itemized contributions go on the papers. Unitemized contributions can be all gathered together and put in one line on the summary sheet under unitemized contributions. So that unitemized is any monetary gift or good or service totaling $100 or less a year. They don't appear on the supporting documents. They get placed on unitemized contributions. But like I said, if the contributors' aggregate contributions throughout the year exceed $100, it must be itemized. And regular parties have that $200 threshold, not $100. So if you're a treasurer for a regular party, keep in mind, $200.01, itemized. $200 or less can go unitemized. Less paperwork for you and for me. Prohibited contributors in the legal limit in corporations and labor organizations. Under Indiana law, foreign nationals are not, they're prohibited from making contributions in connections with elections. It's kind of uncomfortable to ask someone if they're a U.S. citizen, if they're contributing, but it's important. We can't have any foreign nationals influencing a U.S. election. So they are one of the prohibited contributors. And contributions to a committee from corporations or labor organizations may not exceed $2,000. And what we mean by that is not $2,000 per candidate. If I'm the president of ABC Corporation, I can only spend $2,000 total amongst all candidates for a local election. So what happens if someone gives you $2,500 from a corporation? You need to give the $500 back. So keep that in mind. You can't accept those contributions from a corporation. Like I said, if it's an LLC and they want to give you $5,000, great. but not a corporation. So keep that in mind, that's important. And we would go after the corporation and the candidate too. But also keep in mind, if you spend $50 at Walmart now, and then you spend $50 at Walmart later, and it comes over the $100 mark, then they have to be itemized. So keep that in mind. And there's instructions and examples are on the back of Schedule B, so that will help you. Okay. How can your money be spent? So you put your own money in, people have donated money to you. However the money gets into your account, how can you spend it? There are very specific ways and the guidelines for what it can be spent. I'm going to read this because it comes straight out of the code. Money received by a candidate or committee may only be used to defray any expenses reasonably related to a person's or a committee's campaign for office, continuing political activity, or activity related to a service once you're in an elected office. Or you can make an expenditure to any committee of any political party or another candidate's committee, or if you're ready to disband upon dissolution of the committee, when you're closing your committee and you have leftover money, there's specific things that you can use that money for if it's leftover. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Reasonably related to a person's campaign or their office, it's a little bit fuzzy, so I would say, when in doubt, be sure that your expenditures are being used for those specific things. And the state, in a conversation I had with them, said it would be good for me to mention that charitable contributions are only mentioned when dissolving your committee. So do with that what you will. Okay. Special note, transfers from and to other committees. So all transfers in and out from other committees, including in-kind contributions and expenditures, regardless of the amount, must be itemized on Schedule A and B. So if you get a contribution from someone and it's less than $100, if it's an individual, you don't need to itemize it. But if another committee, if the committee to elect Bob Jones gives you $25, that has to be listed. Because we need to know, someone gave Bob that money and Bob gave you that money, where is that money going to and coming from? So as a matter of transparency, anything in and out between committees, whether it's a regular party committee or another candidates committee or a PAC, you have to itemize it, even if it's $5. They just need to know where that money came from and is going. So that's important. We're at Schedule D and Schedule E, loans. So remember when I said if you're putting your own money in and you hope to pay yourself back, it has to be a loan. And on the Schedule A for individuals, you would put your name, and instead of being a direct contribution, there's a little box that you check that says loans. But if you loan money to the committee, it has to be reported on a Schedule D. That's the second to the last paper in your packet. It's loans, it's debts owed by the committee. That's the Schedule D. So you put your money in, it now belongs in the committee's account, and if at the end you want to get any of that money back, you have to repay the loan. The committee repays the loan to you. You are the person who lent it. So you must list on Schedule D the lender, most of the time it's you, or maybe it's your brother or someone you know who said, hey, you need some money to start it, I'll give you this money, but I want it back. That's a loan to the committee. You must have the lender or creditor's full name and address, and you must disclose loans or debts incurred within the reporting period and all previous loans or debts owed by the committee. So, and then you total the amount that you have loaned your own committee or someone else has loaned your committee, and that goes on line 19 of the summary sheet. And it's reported with a Schedule D in every subsequent report until that debt is extinguished. So what that means is, if you have a loan that you have loaned your committee, make a copy of your Schedule D, because that Schedule D has to go with every report that you ever file, as long as that debt is still in place. Until the debt is repaid, you just have to have that Schedule D with if there's a loan involved. And sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes you have so much money in your candidates committee that someone else running says, hey, can I have a loan from your committee to help fund mine? That's okay, but that gets reported on a Schedule E that's owed to the committee. So if your committee is lending someone else money, that goes on a Schedule E, and that also has to go on every report that you submit. So we know from now on, somebody owes you some money and you expect to be paid back. So I have note at the bottom, if a candidate gives their own money to the committee and expects it to be paid back, it must be listed as a loan on Schedule A and Schedule D. And if you get a bunch of money and repay yourself back, then you have to show that going out of your committee's account by a Schedule B, expenditures, and the Schedule D, you would show how you repaid a little bit of that loan or the whole thing. And if you want to close your committee, there can't be any loans outstanding. Here's the mysterious CFA 1 supplemental report of receipts and expenditures. So the CFA 11 is only used by candidate committees during a specific block of time in the spring and fall of election years in which they're on the ballot to show contributions of $1,000 or more. So what happens is, remember how I said the pre-primary covers the dates from January 1st through April 7th, but the election's not till May 2. So if someone gives you $1,000 between April 7th and 48 hours before the election, we need to know that. And that's the CFA 11 report. And if that happens, we'd be very happy if somebody wants to give you $1,000 right before the election, but we have to know about it, and we have to know about it within 48 hours. That's why it's sometimes called a 48-hour report. And that includes you, the candidate, dumping $1,000 of your own money into the account. If you do that during that window, we need a CFA 11 from you. All right, I'm going to take a picture. Okay, disbanding a committee. A committee must continue to submit reports by the required deadlines as long as a committee is open. No later than noon 30 days after the date a committee disbands, the last person to be treasurer shall file a final disbanding report which covers the time period since the last report up until the last day the committee existed. So if you're done with your political career, disband your committee. You will not have to file any more reports with us, and you'll be happy that you don't. So, but in order to disband, you have to have zero cash on hand, so there's nothing in your account. The committee doesn't owe you anything or anyone else, and the committee doesn't owe or it's not owed, so no loans either way. Then you can disband. And any surplus funds can be distributed to another committee, a charitable organization under 501c3, or contributors to the committee on a pro rata basis. I'm going to grab a cough drop. Hold on. So if you are finished with your activity and you want to pay yourself back, you pay those loans back to yourself. Or you can donate to another committee, like the, if you want to give to the Munster Republicans or the Hammond Dems or whatever, or another candidate who you want to support, you can do that with the extra money in your account. If you're going to give to a charity, it must be a 501. You can't just give to someone who's in need. It has to be a 501. Charitable organization. Or if you know that only 3 people gave to your committee, it's your mom, your sister, and your friend, you can take the money that's back and divide it by 3 and give them each the money back that they contributed. But it has to be even. You can't give your mom more than your friend. All right, here is the test. Have you been listening? Jerry gave CTE Robin cases of chips for her fundraiser. Does Robin show this on her report? And how? In kind, yay! So that would be both in and out. The value of the chips gets shown as a contribution, but you don't have that money in your account. It got spent on chips. So that goes on the Schedule B. Now we have CTE Kim gave CTE Kelly $25. Does Kelly show that on her report? Yes. Where? All right, this is a trick question. So, because it's a committee to elect, it has to be shown, even though it's under $100, because it's from another committee. And she gave her $25. It's a direct contribution. So it has to be shown on the schedule that goes for other organizations. I think maybe it's A5. And it only has to be itemized because it's from another committee, even though it's under the threshold. So, CTE Lori is disbanding her committee and has surplus funds. Can she make a charitable donation to the GoFundMe page for her neighbor's medical expenses? No. Why not? It's not a recognized charity. You'd love to help your neighbor, and you could do that from your personal funds, but not from your committee funds. People's Court gave CTE Lewis $2,500. What schedule does that belong on? All right, it's the one for corporations, but he's got a problem. Right. Okay, so the limit's $2,000, but he got $2,500. He's real excited about that, but the $500 has got to go back to them. So you would write a check back to People's Corporation for $500 with a nice thank you note that says, thank you for your donation. I can only accept $2,000 of this. And when they cash that check, then you'll be sort of absolved of that over the limit.
I got one question on this. Is it the candidate's responsibility to make sure the corporation hasn't gone over their $2,000 limit?
You just pay attention to what they gave you,
Okay.
and you'll pay attention to what they give everybody else.
Okay.
CTE Juanita had a fundraiser. Her mom and her cousin each bought a ticket for $75. Where does this belong on her report? Unitemized, because it's less than $100. She's going to keep a list of how much her mom and her cousin give her throughout the year, and when it hits 100, she'll itemize that. All right, good job. You're listening. Penalties. This is where we spend a lot of our time. The County Election Board is responsible for administering the Campaign Finance Act and must ascertain whether candidates or committees have failed to timely file statements of organization or reports, or have filed defective statements or reports. We are not the campaign finance police. We say that a lot in our office. We're not the campaign finance police, but it is our responsibility to make sure you turn in your reports and to make sure that they're done correctly according to statute. So we do have enforcement penalties that are put in place by the board. So delinquent reports. If a report is filed after the deadline, a day late, an hour late, a month late, a year late, it's delinquent. As well as reports that have never been filed, they're all delinquent. The County Election Board must give notice of delinquency. We mail you a nice paper that says, this report was due this day, you didn't file it, or you filed it 5 days late. You filed it 2 minutes late. Rats. But we do have an actual timestamp, and if you run into our office at 11:59 and expect that we're going to timestamp it, maybe you'll make it, maybe you won't. Don't run that risk. Get it in early. So the County Election Board must give notice of delinquency The committee must file the delinquent statement or report immediately following the notice. If you get it in the mail, don't throw it in the pile of mail by the rest of the stuff and think, oh, rats, I'll think about that some other day. Get it in, because there are fines, and the sooner you get it in, the better it is for all of us. So the candidate or committee has the opportunity for a hearing at an upcoming meeting of the Board of Elections. So the letter we get you will say, it was due this date, you didn't file it, or you filed it late. You have an opportunity to be heard before the board. It's in this room, and our board sits right here, and they will hear, I would say, if you have any delinquencies, come to the board meeting if you can. They'll give you plenty of notice to come here. Just tell them what happened. Oh my goodness, I totally forgot, or I'm new at this, or I was sick, or I was out of town, whatever. And if you can't make it to the board meeting, then send an I'm sorry note. You can email it to us, you can drop it off, you can mail it, address it to the Lake County Board of Elections, explain the circumstances, and we will submit that letter on your behalf to the board. So, yes, sir.
When is the board meeting?
The board meeting's every month. It's usually the third Tuesday of the month, but it will, if you are delinquent, we'll tell you exactly when the board meeting is and when to show up. You will know. And here's also an interesting thing. The county election board must post a list of delinquent filers in a public place near the entrance of the Board of Elections office. We call this the wall of shame. So, and that's also public record. We had someone come in and say, I want to know every committee that has had a delinquency. Okay, it's right up on the wall. You can take a picture. We can give you a copy of it for 10 cents a page. So you may or may not notice there's a list on the wall outside the office downstairs, and it's got the list of everyone who's delinquent, whether they were 2 minutes or 2 months. So long story short, show up to the meeting or write a letter. Okay, enforcement and penalties, delinquent reports. If you're minutes late or whatever, a person who fails to file a required statement or report is subject to a civil penalty of $50 per calendar day, starting at noon on the deadline day to a maximum of $1,000. So it's due April 14th at noon. If you bring it in at 12:05, that's day one of your delinquency, $50. Next day, another $50. Next day, another $50. Please get it in. You can see how, the pain will make it more important than laying at the bottom of your mail pile. So, person who fails to file a report required by the Campaign Finance Act commits a Class B misdemeanor and is subject to $1,000 fine. That's personally 180 days imprisonment or both. So when you say, I'm going to be my own treasurer, or you talk your bestie into being your treasurer, this is why we have them sign understanding their liability. Because there is civil penalty liability and criminal liability if you are a treasurer of one of these committees. So it's important work, and you can easily complete your reporting requirements. Don't be afraid, just do your stuff. A person who knowingly files a fraudulent report commits a level 6 felony and is subject to $10,000 fine, 2.5 years imprisonment, or both. That's for the people who purposefully intend to commit a fraudulent report. So don't do that. Defective reports. This is why we're here today, to learn how to do our reports correctly. Because if you don't do your report correctly, if one of those required elements is missing or incorrect, you get a love note that looks like this. And it has a list of all the required elements of the report, and we will send it back to you and say, hey, good try, but you missed the covering dates, or you didn't have your codes and purposes on your Schedule B, or you added wrong and you thought you had $100 and you have $463. It happens all the time. So or it's not signed. One thing about signatures that's important to know, if you have a candidates committee and you have someone else serving as your treasurer, totally fine, but every report that you submit has to be signed by the treasurer and the candidate. It's on the back of that, of the summary sheet. So if you're your own treasurer, you can sign as candidate, that's fine. If someone else is serving as your treasurer, they can sign and you must sign. They do that so that your treasurer is not doing a whole bunch of stuff that you are unaware of, because you are also responsible. They want to make sure that both the treasurer and the candidate / chairman understand what's being reported. So a report that has errors in required information is defective. County Election Board must give notice to a candidate or committee which has filed a defective report to correct the report not later than noon 5 calendar days after receiving our love note notification. So you get this in the mail. This is really important. Fix it because you have 5 days, or guess what? There are penalties. County Election Board must post in a public place near the entrance a list of people who have filed defective reports. So that's why it's important to get it right, and that's why we're so glad you're here today to learn about getting it right. Defective reports. A person who fails to file a correction to the defective report after notified to do so is subject to a civil penalty of $10 per calendar day. So it's less than the $50. But it still stings, $10 a day, beginning with the first day, noon on the 5th day after receiving notice, to a maximum of $100. Now here's the thing. We all know the mail is a little bit unpredictable. So we mail you this letter and we'll put a date on it. We need this thing back in our office by noon on, and we'll put a date. We don't know how long it takes to get to you. We don't know how long it takes to get it back. So we are a little bit more generous in our deadlines than the required 5 days. So we'll usually give you 10 days or 2 weeks to allow for the mail there and back. So just please make your corrections as soon as you can. And if you have real problems, we try to explain very simply, you added wrong on this page, or you didn't put the right beginning balance. And those are the main things that go wrong. The balance is wrong, beginning balance, or you didn't sign it, or you added wrong.
So
Those are
Lori,
the things.
are
Yes.
fines considered an expenditure on that?
Yep, if you get fined for something, that can be an expenditure and needs to be,
So if you pay for it out of your personal, that's a contribution to your campaign?
you would do that as an
Yes.
in-kind contribution, and show it on your Schedule A and B. Disclaimers and yard signs. Everyone has seen commercials on TV where they say all the stuff they want to say, and then they say in a hushed tone, paid for by the committee to elect. Or you'll see a sign and it's this tiny writing on the bottom. There are legal requirements for how big the disclaimer has to be on your signs and printed materials. So we have a brochure about that. You may or may not have picked it up when you walked in the room. Please refer to the political signs and disclaimers brochure for the specifics regarding requirements for disclaimers on yard signs, billboards, printed material. Voter registration and ABS forms are available in our office or on that Indiana Secretary of State website, which once again is in.gov/SOS. A note about polling places. If you are running for office, you cannot be in a polling place except your own polling place while you're voting. So go to your own polling place, cast your vote, and get out. Candidates may not be in the chute within 50 feet of the entrance to a polling place. So you can be way outside the chute and have someone handing out information or whatever, but you can't be in the polling place and you cannot be in the chute. So what happens after the primary? You're probably all focused on the primary and getting through that. Great, put all your energy there. If you win in the primary, your committee remains open and you must continue filing reports according to the reporting schedule. So you win in the primary, we're going to need a pre-election report from you. And that's due in October. And you can see the yellow sheet for the dates about that. If you lose in the primary, you can choose to close your committee by filing a final disband report, get rid of all the money that's in there, pay yourself back, pay back whoever lent you the money, close your committee, and then you are done reporting. Or you can keep your committee open and you must continue filing reports, remembering that the annual report will be your next report due, and that's in January of the following year by the third Wednesday. And remember, closing your committee does not relieve you of assessed fines. So we have a few people who have chosen not to complete their reports. We've told them they haven't. The county election board has met and assessed fines. We've sent them letters saying you now owe the board X number of money, and they'll say, but I disbanded. Sorry, you still owe the county election board the fines for your delinquent or defective reports. And it's both the chairman and the treasurer who are liable for those fines. So remember, closing your committee does not relieve you of the assessed fines. All right, we are finished with the presentation.